Picture a glamorous Hollywood star from the silent era. Bright lights, elaborate costumes, glimmering studios, the whole dreamlike setting of classic American cinema. Now imagine that star stepping out of the silver screen and into a whirlwind life where grand romances, fabulous wealth, real estate empires, hidden adoptees, and strange masquerades all collide. That's the story of Corinne Griffith, an actress once dubbed the most beautiful woman of the silent screen. Her name might not be as widely recognized today as some of her contemporaries, yet in her heyday she was a major box office draw and a business-savvy celebrity who built a personal fortune that rivaled the richest stars of the time. Born in 1894 in Texarkana, Texas, although she would later insist she was born in Waco, Corinne Griffith came into the world under the name Corinne Griffin. She grew up in a family with more than its fair share of eccentricities and secrets. Her father might have been a church minister, a train conductor, the mayor of Texarkana, or all three, depending on which rumor you believed. Some accounts place him as a religious leader, others claim he was heavily involved in politics, and still others say he was a conductor by trade. The only sure thing is that he was 20 years older than Corinne's mother, a striking age gap that earned a fair bit of local gossip. Corinne also had a younger sister, though their relationship would become murky over time, as we'll see later. The sisters spent their early years in boarding school, shielded to some extent from the financial and emotional turbulence that seemed to swirl around their parents. However, in 1912, tragedy struck. The sisters received a phone call at school announcing that their father had died unexpectedly. Corinne returned home to grieve, but in short order her focus turned to building a life for herself on her own terms. In one of those, it could only happen in a Hollywood movie twist, Corinne won a Mardi Gras beauty pageant in New Orleans. She had always been considered lovely, but the pageant spotlighted her in a way that opened new doors. Among the admiring crowd was a man named Rand S. Sturgeon, who recognized something singular about her. He approached Corinne with a proposal: "Come to Hollywood and try your luck in the film business." This was 1912, a time when motion pictures were on the verge of skyrocketing into the mainstream, and early studios were hungry for fresh faces. The possibility of stardom shimmered in front of her like a mirage. Corinne agreed. The only problem: Hollywood was almost an entire country away from Texarkana, but youthful optimism can conquer any distance. So off she went, forging ahead on little more than that beauty queen glow and the promise of possibility. Rand S. Sturgeon was involved with Vitagraph, an early film studio that specialized in a wide range of motion pictures, from comedic shorts to drama reels that played in Nickelodeons and theaters across America. The studio signed Corinne to a small contract paying her $15 a week, an amount that might seem trivial now, but back then it was a decent paycheck for a novice performer. That's when she decided to change her name from Griffin to Griffith. No one quite knows why she made the alteration. Perhaps she thought Griffith had a more striking ring to it, or maybe she just liked the association with D.W. Griffith, the most renowned film director of the time. In any case, the newly branded Corinne Griffith got her start in small, often unremarkable parts for Vitagraph. She'd show up on set, wait around for hours, then deliver a bit of acting or pose for a few intertitles, the textual screens used in silent films, and collect her modest pay. Early on, she found herself grappling with a question that haunts many aspiring actors. Were these small roles stepping stones to real stardom, or would she fade into the background like so many hopefuls? The turning point arrived in 1920 with an opportunity from Vitagraph that changed everything. They offered Corinne not just a single role, but a dual role in a feature film called The Broadway Bubble. She would portray Adrian Landreth and Adrian's twin sister. Playing two parts demanded dexterity, especially in silent cinema, where an actress had to convey every emotional nuance through gesture, expression, and movement alone. Corinne tackled the challenge with gusto, and critics applauded her convincing portrayal. This was the performance that truly announced her presence in Hollywood, elevating her from a background player to a genuine star attraction. Later, commentators would call it the crowning achievement of her silent film career. Ironically enough, it also foreshadowed the real-life drama that would involve doubles and identity controversies decades later. Meanwhile, her personal life was moving just as quickly. Around the time the Broadway bubble hit theaters, Corinne met and married a man named Webster Campbell, an actor, screenwriter, and producer. It seemed like a match made in industry heaven. Surely they would become a power couple of the silent screen, pooling their talents and connections for maximum success. Reality, however, clashed with that dream. Within 3 years, their marriage collapsed under the weight of Webster's drinking and abusive behavior. Corinne discovered that her husband's temper extended far beyond a few short outbursts. In a time when divorce was still frowned upon, especially in show business, she didn't hesitate. She cut him out of her life. At the same time, she also decided to cut ties with Vitagraph. She felt the studio wasn't paying her what she was worth, and she believed her newfound star power could command a far higher salary. So she walked out on both her husband and her original studio, gambling that bigger opportunities lay ahead. Her faith in her own value paid off almost immediately. First National Pictures snapped her up with a hefty offer, a contract worth $2,500 a week. This was a massive leap from $15 a week, signaling that she was indeed recognized as a top-tier silent actress. Of course, with that kind of money came pressure. Producers at First National wanted proof that Corinne could headline successful pictures. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Her first film with the new studio, Black Oxen, appeared in 1923 and was an instant success. Corinne again played a dual role, this time not as literal twins, but as two facets of the same character's story. Critics and fans delighted in her skill at shifting personalities, capturing subtle nuances without needing a single line of dialogue. Buoyed by this triumph, she followed it with a string of hits, including 1924's Mademoiselle Midnight, and others that cemented her status as one of the silent era's grand leading ladies. Romance entered the frame again in 1924, when Corinne got involved with another man in the business. His name was Walter Morosco, a writer, producer, actor, and director. As if she hadn't learned from her first experience, she once again decided that marrying another entertainment jack-of-all-trades might be good for her love life and her career. One can only hope Morosco was less troubled by destructive habits than her first husband. In any case, Corinne didn't rely solely on marriage to secure her financial future. She had a keen mind for investments, especially in real estate. By the early 1920s, she'd quietly acquired properties across the Los Angeles area, which proved wise. The city was exploding in population, and real estate prices were going nowhere but up. Supposedly, by mid-decade, she was already worth around $500,000, not counting her Hollywood paychecks. At a time when many silent starlets whittled away their money on frivolous pursuits, Corinne Griffith was building a real estate empire that would sustain her long after her box office clout waned. Meanwhile, she continued racking up hits at First National, but having once walked away from a contract, she wasn't afraid to do it again. By 1928, she left the studio, perhaps feeling she was destined for even greater control over her career. She took the radical step of forming her own production company with her then husband, Walter Morosco, Corinne Griffith Productions. This marked a momentous leap. No longer just an actress for hire, she would produce and star in her own pictures. Her first venture was The Garden of Eden, a romantic comedy that had critics praising her comedic timing and understated charm. Corinne had occasionally experienced box office duds, but this one stung because it was her own money at stake. Producing wasn't as straightforward as she had hoped. Realizing she might have overextended herself, she began to contemplate a new plan. In an unexpected move, Corinne went back to First National. From the outside, it might have looked like a step backward, returning to a studio she had left behind. But Hollywood can be a chess match. Sometimes the best move is to retrace your steps if it sets you up for the right opportunities. This time, the partnership worked to her advantage. In 1929, she starred in The Divine Lady, produced by her husband. The film was something of a technical marvel, featuring not only a musical soundtrack but also singing and sound effects, teasing the dawn of talkies, which would soon dominate the industry. Audiences and critics loved The Divine Lady, praising Corinne's luminous presence, her emotive expressions, and the film's quasi-experimental use of sound. But looming behind the applause was a dreaded question. How would Corinne fare once films included fully synchronized dialogue? Many silent movie stars, no matter how beloved, found themselves undone by the arrival of talkies, either because their voices didn't record well or because they struggled to adapt to a new acting style. Corinne was aware of the risk. She was known for her refined, almost ethereal beauty. She was not known for a robust, commanding voice. So before stepping into a talking picture, she and First National arranged something unprecedented. They took out $1 million insurance policy on her voice. The studio wanted some guarantee that if audiences revolted against the sound of Corinne Griffith speaking lines on film, they wouldn't be left entirely out of pocket. It was a wild scenario. Imagine taking out insurance on the intangible qualities of a star's voice. Yet it spoke volumes about how much confidence they still had in her. In 1930, the moment of truth arrived with Lily of the Field, a talkie remake of one of her earlier silent works. Excitement was high. Moviegoers, critics, and Hollywood insiders were all curious to see how Corinne Griffith would transition into the new era. Then, disaster. The audience reaction to her voice was less than enthusiastic. The film flopped, and far too many viewers thought Corinne's voice sounded awkward, unsuited to the romantic illusions they had built around her. In the cruel calculus of show business, that kind of setback can be fatal. It had nothing to do with her acting skill or her star presence, but everything to do with the mismatch between a new technology and an actress's voice type. Corinne recognized that the talkies were unstoppable. She might squeak by in one or two more parts, but the writing was on the wall. Her golden age in cinema was ending. In 1934, she retired from show business altogether. She also divorced her then husband. It was a clean break from the career that had given her fame and fortune, but that no longer needed her the way it once did. She left, ironically, at a moment when the talkies were exploding in popularity, a shift that would define Hollywood for decades to come. Yet she had an advantage over many other out-of-work silent stars: real estate. Her investments had paid off handsomely, giving her a safety net few others enjoyed. She might not have been on screen anymore, but she had the resources to pivot. That pivot included a third marriage, this time to George Preston Marshall, owner of the NFL's Washington Redskins, now called the Washington Commanders. Marshall was a colorful sports entrepreneur, and Corinne took an immediate interest in the team. She saw potential to inject Hollywood-style showmanship into football, which at that time was mostly about the game itself, with relatively little spectacle off the field. With Corinne's prompting, Marshall hired a large band to entertain before and during games. She also designed new uniforms for the players and wrote a team song. She even staged elaborate halftime shows featuring enormous teepees and performers in Indian regalia, something that modern audiences would recognize as culturally insensitive, but that fans of the era apparently found entertaining. Corinne's brand of showbiz flash certainly spiced up an NFL game, turning it into something more akin to a Broadway revue. Sports writers, fans, and onlookers were all agog at how she blended her cinematic flair with professional football. In 1941, she and George Marshall adopted 2 baby girls named Cynthia and Pamela. They appeared briefly in some publicity materials, including a Los Angeles Times feature, at which point they seemed to vanish from public mention entirely. No one heard of Cynthia or Pamela again. They weren't referenced in later interviews, news stories, or even in Corinne's obituary. Were they returned to an orphanage? Did they pass away tragically? No clear record appears in the public domain. It's just one more strange footnote in Corinne's life, overshadowed by her continuing pursuit of wealth and independence. Indeed, she prided herself on not relying exclusively on her husband's checkbook. She still managed her real estate holdings, which continued to multiply in value. And as she compared her income to her yearly tax bill, she grew outraged. In her mind, taxes were an unwelcome intrusion by the government. She suspected much of the revenue went to politicians' pockets rather than social progress. While many people just grumbled, she waged a personal crusade, writing speeches and delivering them around the country, urging Americans to reject the income tax altogether. She believed women in particular should be financially self-sufficient, so they wouldn't have to resort to subtle manipulations to get spending money from husbands. The entire concept of dependency grated on her, considering that she had soared to stardom through her own talent, walked away from big studios on principle, and built a thriving real estate empire. It's no surprise she found the notion of giving up large chunks of money to taxes galling. She delivered around 500 speeches on the evils of taxation, positioning herself as a champion of personal autonomy. Meanwhile, Corinne used her writing skills for more than just anti-tax diatribes. Over the course of her life, she penned 11 books. 2 even became bestsellers, broadening her audience well beyond movie buffs. One might say she transformed herself into a multi-hyphenate decades before that term became popular. Actress, producer, investor, sports promoter, writer, lecturer. That unstoppable drive seemed to define her every move. By 1958, trouble was brewing in her 3rd marriage. She parted ways with George Marshall, giving her more time to reflect on her life's direction. For reasons still not entirely clear, she decided to make an unexpected return to film. In 1962, she appeared in Paradise Alley, a modest production that also featured stars from the silent era, presumably to spark nostalgia. The release was tiny, and few people outside hardcore classic film circles even noticed. Some speculated that she missed the glamour of being on camera. Others believed it was just a personal project to reconnect with old friends. If Corinne Griffith craved attention, she found it by marrying for the 4th time. Her new husband, Danny Scholl, some sources say Shaw, was 25 years her junior. By this point, she was well into her 60s, if not early 70s, while he was in his 40s. Such a match was unusual for the era, but she followed the pattern of wealthy older magnates who wed much younger spouses. Perhaps she simply liked the idea of reinvention yet again, or maybe she was lonely and drawn to his youthful energy. But the marriage blew up spectacularly. Corinne realized within days, maybe even hours, that this was a colossal mistake. She sought an annulment, claiming they had never consummated the union. The judge refused, and the matter proceeded to a messy divorce. Temporary alimony was set at $200 a month, which enraged Corinne. She despised paying out money to people she viewed as hangers-on. She'd spent her life advocating independence for women, building fortunes in property, and refusing to let men define her existence. So being forced to hand over money to a man who might have tricked her felt like the ultimate insult. Yet it was her behavior in court that caused jaws to drop across the nation. Facing a steep settlement, she threw out a mind-bending claim. She was not actually Corinne Griffith at all. She was, she said, another woman entirely, someone named Augusta Griffin, Corinne's younger sister. Corinne had died way back in 1924, and Augusta had stepped in to replace her, so the public, the studios, and the fans wouldn't be any the wiser. This tale, she insisted, explained why she shouldn't be liable for anything in Corinne Griffith's name. Journalists and court spectators listened in disbelief as she spun an elaborate narrative involving a film shoot in Mexico, a $1 million bribe from producer Adolf Zukor, and the hush-hush switch that allowed Mary to seamlessly slide into Corinne's place. She even maintained that her previous marriages to Webster Campbell, Walter Morosco, and George Marshall had never happened, presumably because she was never the real Corinne in the first place. It was an absurd claim, defying logic, but she refused to budge. Friends who testified recognized her as none other than Corinne Griffith, the actress they had known for decades. They said they saw no sign whatsoever that she was any kind of imposter. The judge, unimpressed by the tall tale, asked her how old she was, trying to glean anything factual. She claimed not to know, attributing her ignorance to her religious beliefs. She said she was a Christian Scientist and that discussing her age was forbidden by her faith, and to the fact that she had stopped counting after she turned 13. In later interviews, she contradicted even this story, saying no, she wasn't actually Augusta, but her twin sister Mary, who was the exact same age. The entire circus was so baffling that the press ran sensational headlines for weeks. Was this an attempt to prove mental incompetence so she wouldn't have to pay alimony? Was it an eccentric ploy? Or had Corinne's sense of identity actually begun to unravel? Some suggested she was trying to replicate a real-life version of the twin sister roles she had played on screen. Others speculated that age or possible mental decline had led her to confabulate. But it could just as easily have been a calculated lie to confuse the court and frustrate her soon-to-be ex-husband's lawyer. In the end, the divorce was granted. Corinne did not end up paying ongoing alimony to Danny, but she was forced to cover his legal bills. The court made no official finding on her bizarre claim of being someone else. They simply regarded it as an irrelevant and obviously false distraction. Once the divorce fiasco ended, the public's interest in Corinne Griffith mostly faded. She lived on quietly, overshadowed by younger stars of subsequent decades. She still had a fortune in real estate, was rumored to continue writing occasionally, and gave no more bombshell interviews about her identity. Then in July 1979, she suffered a stroke. Admitted to St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, she died on July 13th, 1979. Strangely, the entertainment press largely ignored her passing for nearly 2 weeks. Only on July 26th did Daily Variety print an obituary. It was a muted end for someone who had once been among the richest, most recognizable women in America. The near silence that greeted her death contrasted starkly with the roar of attention she had courted for most of her life. In the final accounting, Corinne Griffith leaves behind a tangle of questions as substantial as her wealth. Which of her claims were ever true? Did those adopted daughters simply vanish? Or did she quietly relinquish them for reasons we'll never know? Why did she attempt to pass herself off as a sister? And how did she expect anyone to believe such a story? Was it all one giant performance piece, an actress's last attempt to command the stage in a real-life drama? Perhaps we'll never know. She lived large in every sense of the word, from her million-dollar salary jumps in the silent era to her elaborate halftime spectacles in the NFL, from her bold statements against tax policy to her improbable claim of having replaced her own self with a twin. By turns visionary, reckless, cunning, and vulnerable, Corinne Griffith stands as one of early Hollywood's most fascinating enigmas. Her tale also reveals how silent film stardom in particular was a double-edged sword. On one hand, her expressive face and fluid body language were perfect for the silent era, catapulting her to wealth and fame. On the other hand, the absence of recorded speech in her prime meant that audiences built illusions of how she might sound. Once talkies arrived, that illusion shattered. Still, if she never conquered talkies, she outmaneuvered many of her peers by becoming financially independent. She refused to wither away in obscurity, finding new arenas to exercise her imagination and flamboyance, most notably in the sphere of sports entertainment, and then in that bizarre stand at the divorce court. Even now, that scene in the courtroom remains one of the strangest episodes in Hollywood history. Picture an elderly star, elegantly dressed, insisting to a bemused judge and row of attorneys that she is not who everyone believes her to be. Perhaps there's a tragic subtext beneath the absurdity, an aging actress confronting the ephemeral nature of identity. Or maybe she was simply an icon at the end of her rope, determined not to pay a penny more than she had to. Whichever interpretation you lean toward, the moment embodies the best and worst of old Hollywood drama. Captivating, mystifying, tinged with the faint aura of a publicity stunt, yet also heartbreakingly real. For fans of vintage cinema, Corinne Griffith's body of work represents a fascinating time capsule. In her best films, you can see how she combined a refined beauty with a surprisingly modern sense of wit. Watch her comedic timing in a silent film, and you'll see her shift from playful to pensive to downright mischievous, all without uttering a sound. In her more dramatic roles, she had a knack for portraying emotional depth, especially in those dual or twin parts where she confronted the camera from two perspectives. She was subtle, never telegraphing her feelings too blatantly, a nuance that many silent starlets lacked. Even critics in her day acknowledged that she could elevate material that might otherwise have been forgettable. In an alternate universe, if she'd possessed a voice that matched her presence, she might have soared to new heights once talkies took over. Instead, she stands among that cohort of silent giants like John Gilbert, Clara Bow, and others, whose transition to sound was not particularly kind. Her approach to business foreshadowed the modern phenomenon of celebrities expanding into entrepreneurial ventures. She was among the first wave of stars to prove that one's position in the spotlight could be parlayed into real estate speculation, sports franchising, and even writing. In that sense, she was well ahead of her time, a testament to her practical streak. She's also an intriguing example of a woman in early 20th century America who refused to let a man define her finances. While she did marry wealthy men, she kept her own accounts robust enough to stand on her own, a principle she championed publicly. She was outspoken about how wives should avoid subservience by building personal wealth. This position might have raised eyebrows in an era when women were often typecast as homemakers. She gave speech after speech denouncing the financial tricks wives had to resort to, arguing that if women had their own means, they could demand respect from husbands. She might have been a flamboyant figure prone to dramatic lies, but she was also an early voice for female independence. Her athletic flamboyance with the Washington Redskins was another anomaly. Rarely do we see an actress of that era so immersed in sports promotion. She introduced choreography, elaborate costumes, and festive musical numbers into what was otherwise a straightforward athletic competition, foreshadowing the spectacle-laden halftime shows we see today at major sporting events. It's difficult to overstate how unusual this was in the 1930s and 1940s. Most NFL owners stuck to the standard formula of selling tickets on the merit of the game alone. But Corinne believed that entertainment could be woven into every aspect of an event, bridging the gap between show business and athletics. Fans may have found it silly or thrilling or both, but it certainly made them talk about the Redskins in new ways. Then there are the children, Cynthia and Pamela, who floated into the public eye for that brief mention in 1941, only to disappear from the historical record. That detail alone, if uncovered, might shed light on the deeper complexities of Corinne's personal life. Did she keep them shielded from publicity? Did they grow up quietly in another city or country? Were they relinquished for adoption again, or perhaps entrusted to relatives? In an era long before social media or thorough celebrity tabloids, it was easier for well-heeled families to keep such matters private. But for a star as flamboyant and outspoken as Corinne, the silence seems even more peculiar. It's emblematic of a life full of question marks, so many rumors and half-truths, so many contradictory public statements. Her hatred of taxes, though comical in some respects, underscores an intense individualism. She disdained the notion that her earnings, so painstakingly built through savvy film deals and real estate, should be siphoned off to fund what she considered governmental graft. In her view, she had blazed her own trail, from small-town Texas to Hollywood stardom, from unlucky marriages to dynamic independence. Why should some bureaucratic apparatus get a share of her success? It was a viewpoint that, for the time, was quite radical. She didn't just grumble about it in private. She publicly campaigned to sway others. That she found an audience for these speeches shows her enduring star power. Even if she wasn't on the silver screen anymore, people still found her interesting enough to attend her talks, read her pamphlets, and either cheer her on or deride her as a kook. Was she a level-headed entrepreneur who saw life's opportunities and seized them? Or was she a flighty prima donna spinning self-serving fables at every turn? In truth, she might have been both, and that duality kept her in the spotlight far longer than many silent-era colleagues. You can almost imagine her on her deathbed in 1979, still crafting outlandish stories in her mind, still clinging to the idea that she could outsmart whatever obstacles confronted her. That her death went nearly unnoticed for 2 weeks in the major entertainment press feels like the final surprising twist in her saga. After spending so much of her life orchestrating headlines, some of them laudatory, some scandalous, she passed away with scant mention. It's reminiscent of the ephemeral nature of fame. For all the flamboyant declarations and shrewd business moves, for all the star turns and artistic risks, the public's focus had drifted on to new icons. The small mention that finally did appear, tucked away in trade papers, is a quiet footnote to a career that once generated front-page stories. She had soared, stumbled, and soared again, only to exit stage left when the final curtain fell. Still, if you dig back into the archives of silent film, or read up on the early NFL extravaganzas, or pick up her best-selling books, you'll see hints of the unstoppable force that was Corinne Griffith. She was a luminous presence in a medium that was evolving before her eyes, an actress confident enough to say no to major studios long before that was common, and a woman who prided herself on outsmarting any environment that tried to confine her. Her fleeting attempt to outsmart the legal system by claiming she wasn't Corinne Griffith might strike us as absurd, but it also evokes a certain mythic dimension. The star who reinvented herself so many times that she no longer recognized the original version. Whether we chuckle or feel a pang of sadness, it's undeniably compelling. Her story, from Texarkana to Tinseltown to team-building stunts in the NFL, stands as proof of the fluid boundaries that celebrities can cross. She refused to remain in any one box for too long: silent film star, wife, real estate mogul, writer, anti-tax crusader, sports showrunner. She was ambitious enough to try them all and flamboyant enough to pull them off to varying degrees of success. Even though the talkies ended her prime film career, she found new ways to remain relevant. So as this tale of lies, wealth, showbiz, marriages, divorces, possible missing children, and flamboyant halftime productions draws to a close, let's not forget the final questions she left us with. Questions that might never be answered but will continue to fascinate future generations of film buffs, historians, and fans of all things bizarre and grandiose. Corinne Griffith's life was more than a Hollywood tale. It was an epic of reinventions, one that invites us to ask whether truth can sometimes be overshadowed by the brilliance of an ever-shifting performance. Maybe that's the greatest parting lesson she gave. In a world enthralled by spectacle, the line between real life and an elaborate act can become so blurred that even the star herself isn't always sure which side she's on. And with that tantalizing possibility, we say farewell to Corinne Griffith, the silent star who spoke volumes through her extraordinary, confounding, and unforgettable life story. Until next time, let's keep the curiosity alive. There's a vast trove of classic Hollywood stories just waiting to be uncovered, some comedic, some tragic, and many every bit as strange as Corinne Griffith's. If you're drawn to these untold tales, be sure to stay connected, because the golden age of entertainment is bursting with secrets that can still enthrall us today. And who knows? You might just stumble upon another star who rivaled Corinne in audacity. For now, though, let her legend linger in your mind as a reminder that, in show business, reality can be every bit as peculiar as the pictures that flicker on screen.